We need to radically redefine how we understand sex. It was soul crushing. Sex is political still, and that's the thing that people don't also understand. I think particularly at the moment there needs to be more community.
That's going to be a great soundbite.
Oh, good. Wow, that is such a big question.
You're listening to In the Dome with Soph and Belle, two podcast fans turned founders building the home for podcast communities.
We're taking your favourite hosts out of the studio to unpack why they got started, the fandom, the stories, and the connections that make podcasts so powerful.
So powerful that we decided to build a company around it.
Let's get into it.
Before we get into it, we want to thank all the Domies for getting behind the pod. We really appreciate all the love.
And if you haven't already, make sure to jump on our website, homeofdome.com, and join our waitlist. There's a huge amount of things coming up and you don't want to miss it.
Today, we have a very special guest. We are in the Dome with Georgia Grace, or you might know her as G-Spot. Welcome, Georgia.
Yay, thank you for having me.
We are so excited to have you, G, Georgia. Going through nicknames now, we'll test a few out. We'll see where we land. If you don't know, Georgia is a certified sex and relationship practitioner and author, the co-founder of Normal Co, and of course the host of Glad You Came Pod. We are here, as always, in the beautiful Arms Length in Sydney's Potts Point. Belle, what are we going to be covering today's ep?
We are talking all things sex, relationships, how to have these conversations, and the behind the scenes of the Glad You Came podcast. So strap in. It's going to be an exciting conversation. So
looking forward to it.
I'm so excited to be here in this beautiful, dimly lit room. It's quite sensual. Yeah.
So as I sort of just said from the outset, you have a number of hats. Through everything that you do and all the content that you create, there's a real through line to it all. I mean, I think you can speak to it much more than I can. What really is your mission with all the things that you're doing?
In its most basic form, I'm trying to make conversations about sex feel normal and accessible. Many of us have not had the sex education that we so desperately want and need. In all of the work I'm doing, I'm trying to create spaces where people can get that information. I find it in session when I'm working with individuals and couples, but I also find it in mediums like being online or in podcasts that when we start to talk more about it, it actually feels easier. And the more we talk about things, the less shame there is around it. Facilitating conversations, even if it is clunky and a little bit weird, which are some of the conversations I love the most, probably the through line. But what did you pick up?
I think it's very that. In fact, actually, I wanted to ask because I think it's a combination of education and examination of sex relationships, but also the insight that you've picked up that people aren't having these conversations comfortably, or maybe are too afraid of whatever reason. It's actually something that I wanted to ask you. Which of those two was more compelling for you in getting into this work? Was it really the examination, or was it more why people aren't having the conversations?
It's actually all of it. Often we can fall into sort of binaries of one thing or the other, one idea or one key value or one key mission. We need to understand why people aren't having conversations. Like, why is that? What is the challenge? Because I could be creating the space and give you the tools and give you the language and give you a few one-liners. But if there's this piece here where there's shame or uncertainty or, trauma, we also need to tackle that. I've always been really curious about sex, more curious than I think I ever knew. And I'm reflecting on who I was as a young person and the thoughts that I would have, or the fascination I would have with sex. And that's kind of emerging since I've started studying as well. I think it was quite depressing to realize how many people had bad experiences in sex and relationships, to even just boring and unfulfilling. So that was the driver, because sex is supposed to be this really fun, liberating, exciting, pleasurable thing. But for many different reasons, lots of people don't have access to that.
You've done such an incredible work around breaking down that taboo and destigmatizing these conversations. They're such important conversations around sex and sexuality. What were the ones that you personally observed we weren't having, whether that's in session or more culturally in the media? What was sort of the missing piece there?
One is safety. And safety is such an interesting thing because we can never guarantee safety. Especially looking at the world today, I think it inherently feels like quite an unsafe place for many of us to exist in. A lot of people haven't felt safe in their bodies. That safety might be, I don't feel comfortable in my body. I haven't been taught how to explore my body, or I have internalized homophobia, to feeling unsafe or being in unsafe experiences, but then also pleasure. For many people, sex can feel really performative. We often want to perform to be a good lover. We want to perform to, make someone else come, but also like perform our own pleasure. It often is a big part of the issues that people present with in session is that they're not actually feeling pleasure during sex, particularly for people with vulvas. The orgasm gap still exists. And despite all of this education and despite all this new research, there is still a gap. It hasn't been a big part of the conversation up until like the past decade or so, and it still needs to be a part of the conversation. We're not actually seeing that gap close that drastically, which I find fascinating.
What do you think is the path forward to closing that gap and sort of equipping people with the tools to have these conversations?
I think we need to radically redefine how we understand sex. I often call it queering up sex because lesbians don't have this issue. Like lesbians don't have this big gap in, one partner climaxing. Yeah. So when I talk about queering up sex, queering is essentially creating your own definition of sex, and it's moving beyond these narratives. Queer often, if we're going back to the origins of the word, it's weird. To be queer is to be weird or odd or different. And obviously queers have reclaimed that word and it is now an identity and so on. If we can queer up how we understand sex and actually have sex in a way that feels good beyond this narrative of penetration, but that is it's not impossible, actually. I'm going to hold some hope. It feels really hard because there's such a solid definition of what sex is. And even when I work with queer couples or lesbian couples, a lot of them may still define sex as penetration. It's not just straight people who have this image. Education has to be a huge part of it. It's great that we have consent education, but we need age-appropriate pleasure education. We need young people to learn about porn because they will find it. Age verification is coming in terms of, young people not being able to access porn, but they will find a way. They're so smart. It's not about just removing it. We actually need to educate people and be like, this is porn, it's a performance, and this is sex.
Yep.
And it's often a really, really, really long process.
You have such a brilliant way of articulating these things, and I don't think that comes as a shock, obviously, because you have a background in journalism and writing. You say that you've always been interested in sex and relationships from a young age. Did you also feel that same pull in regards to storytelling and writing these narratives to life, or at what point did you want to combine the two?
When I left school, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I was talking to one of my teachers and he was like, well, you did English.
Yep.
You wrote a story. You like writing. Why don't you just do journalism? And so I got into a journalism degree. And then I did the absolutely sacrilegious thing of going to PR. And all of my journalism peers were like, why would you do that? And I don't know why I did that. I was working in corporate PR for a few years and I hated it. It was so crushing for me. Later in life, I've made sense of that. I've recently got my ADHD diagnosis and I would sit at my desk feeling quite paralyzed and looking at all of these other people around me who could just log on and start working and sit at a desk and complete tasks. My brain couldn't do it. Yeah, at the time I had a private Instagram account and I posted a photo of me in a different country and it was the silhouette of my back, and my manager got that photo and sent it around the team.
Your manager?
My manager sent it around the team to my director and essentially they slut shamed me. This was the time where you didn't have internet access all the time. So nice. Yeah, it was beautiful actually. Yeah. Came home and I was pulled into a room and they told me I had to delete the image. I found out all of these things that were said about me and about my body, about who I was. Couldn't really clock why it felt so uncomfortable. I think I was in a bit of shock. Then I left and I came back the next day and I quit and I said I'm studying sexology as a bit of a fuck you to they absolutely hated it. When I started studying, I really wanted to be in session and I really loved that and I found it a very fulfilling part of the work. But I also saw how getting in session with someone is inaccessible for many people, either financially or, time commitments, or maybe they're just not ready. There was this other really big piece that needed to happen, and that was like the culture around it needed to change. I wanted to find ways to make information accessible as well, and I think storytelling is a really big part of that.
The point of culture is really interesting as well, and I think that the way that stories are told, culture plays a big part in that. Having a background of studying journalism to then go into sexology, when you're having the conversations with whether it be a client or on your content, you're sort of balancing these two minds of journalism and the way that you would approach it with maybe a more intimate lens through sexology lens. There are a few different synergies there. I'm just interested in how you balance the two and whether that was ever, at conflict with each other or whether you found it to be quite seamless.
I guess they are different, but they do feel quite integrated. If we're looking at writing a book or, having a podcast, I think storytelling and people's experiences are really essential. And that was the interesting thing about the book. A lot of the feedback is those stories, those mentions of the struggles or the things that we worked with in session, far more than the approaches or certain modalities. We are social beings. When we hear from other people, it does a huge amount to make us feel comfortable and safe. Someone might share something that they think is weird or abnormal or a thing that they're struggling with, and then someone who is completely different to them but on the other side of the room will be like, oh my God, I feel that too, or that's my experience. Feeling connected and normal, I think, is a really important way to work with these areas.
Would you say that was the point where you sort of realized, wow, there really is an appetite for these conversations? Was it in that sort of group workshops, or was it a client session, or maybe a fan encounter? Just curious to know sort of what that point was for you.
As soon as I get to a phase where I'm like, oh, I think I've done everything, or I'm talking about the same thing over and over again, or I don't need to focus on that thing anymore because I've been doing that for years. Someone will say something, they'll be like, oh, this is changed the way I think. That's me needing to challenge my own thinking and feeling. Just because I'm thinking about these things every day, it isn't the norm.
I find it really interesting that you're saying that people engage with the different types of content in different ways, whether it be through the workshop, for example, or a private session, your social media, the podcast. You had quite a following before you started the podcast. What was it about the podcast medium that for you was so compelling to bring your message, your mission to that format as opposed to what you were already doing?
So I am on social media and I have such a complex relationship with it.
Don't we all?
Yes, yeah, how human of us. I go through phases where I'm like, oh, this is so important. And then I go through phases where I'm just so burnt out and hate it and get quite anxious being online. You have a few minutes, you have a few seconds to minutes to talk about some really complex things. So that's why the medium of something that's longer form, I think, is really, really important.
What have you seen being that main difference between the short form content and the long form content, and how people are engaging with that and the feedback that you're getting from your audience?
Like you're saying, people listening to the podcast, secretly. I think that is so telling.
I know something's really important when the saves on a post outweigh the likes or the comments or the engagement.
It's the visibility of the like as well, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a bit
for
more
sure.
taboo, those topics maybe that you're covering, a bit more outspoken. You're like, oh, I don't know if I want people, and that comes down to your own relationship with yourself and that internalized shame.
I am noticing that cis men, particularly cis straight men, there is such a discomfort around this. So anytime I would talk about an issue that's related to them, like PE, which is premature ejaculation, will not engage with it publicly because it is essentially an admission of a struggle. There are these sort of really hard and fast rules around what it's like for a cis man to be sexual, and they are so stuck. And because they are so stuck in those ideas, we can't move forward.
I'd love to unpack how you want to approach that audience and how you want to get them out of that rigid box.
What I've noticed particularly over the past few years is that in issues where men are perpetrators, but also where they're affected by it, they're so unable to engage. And the way that they engage is resisting and coming up against. It's really different when I'm in session because I can be there with them and I'm curious about them and I'm understanding the ways patriarchy has fucked them up. When I did a post about the Johnny Depp, Brad Pitt, all of these men who are still in our past baskets. And I have never had so much violence directed towards me. I've never had to block so many people. And that was really interesting because people in positions of power who have done horrible things, who have been violent, are able to get away with it. And people still think they're hot and still think they're valuable. There's so much complexity in how we have those conversations to the masses. It's a big machine. And this machine starts in really, really young groups of people around education and around gender roles, supporting them in learning about empathy and care and consent. It's supporting them in navigating the internet and like certain things to look for and when to understand. You might be getting groomed by someone online and the ideas that they're telling you about masculinity to certain degrees. It is also having like the compassion and the empathy to understand the pain that I think a lot of men are in. They react by protecting themselves and they react with anger, and then also holding people accountable and challenging them and being able to do that compassionately. But I don't always have that in myself. I feel a rage around the ways in which male violence affects so many people.
When you get, I want to say feedback, that seems like an incredibly light term
Yes.
for what you're talking about. When you get this response from people that aren't, again, lightly receptive to your content, is the rhetoric an assassination on you? Is it on your argument? Is the fact that you're bringing light to these issues? Like, what is the stance that they're so opposed to?
Sometimes it's like just attacking me and who I am. People might go for the classic homophobia route, which is, so boring and
so
done.
boring. Take it off.
Like, try something
take
new.
it up a notch. Come on. Challenge me.
Yeah, I've had that one before. Mostly it is around issues of gender or violence or anything that is more political. Sex is political still, and that's the thing that people don't also understand. That's a big thing, a piece of feedback. People say, stick to sex, stop talking about politics. And I'm like, baby, how do you think this queer woman can speak? Politics got me here to have a platform. The classic one was stop talking about this, go back to blowjob tips. Which was, it's
I
pretty
sometimes
fascinating.
hate people.
Sometimes it's generous, well. We really saw these conversations hit the global stage, I guess, through the mainstream media of podcasting a few years back with the rise of Call Her Daddy and everything that Alex Cooper did. There's someone that sits at the intersection of media, journalism, certified practice. What was your take?
Call Her Daddy's so interesting because I've tapped in and out over the years. There was a really interesting moment. I think it was about 5 years ago because that was when Normal launched. It was so radical, even like strange or weird to see someone holding a vibrator or talking about sex. It was still existing in the taboo that people were really engaged with it because of outrage or because of like relief and finally having these conversations. So Alex Cooper played a huge role in that. And I think it has been so interesting to see, to go back to the roots of it, which was very salacious stories and sex and sexuality being a big part of what a lot of people loved the podcast for. But then I think it is also really interesting. The more rich you get, the more conservative you become. And I can see these sort of conservative, wealthy, rich folk and how they can be more protective of their brand or the kind of stuff that they talk about. I can't speak to Alex Cooper, and I think this is just like my own thinking around it, but this moving away from talking about sex and the conversations that can really communicate a sexual or a slut shaming around, okay, that was what I used to do and now I'm this sort of elevated person and that's not a part of my brand anymore. I have even noticed it with really like prolific sex workers who have done incredible work. There's a correlation between like getting rich and becoming conservative and protecting those resources and appealing to your investors or a certain demographic so you are palatable. Yeah, there's some thoughts.
If we shift gears now to podcasts, more specifically, Glad You Came. Firstly, incredible name.
Love it.
That's brilliant. I mean, was that just off the dome? Like,
honestly, I think I was love it. We actually struggled with the name for a really long time, and then we landed on that, and then lots of people were like, oh my God, it's such a good name. And I was like, is it? Yeah, we stayed with it.
Yeah, love it. Love the name. Before Glad You Came, you had a podcast with Nova in bed. Is something that you wanted to do with Glad You Came that you didn't do with In Bed, or how did you sort of differentiate the two in that first initial like ideation phase of Glad You Came?
In Bed is more like a deep dive, huge investigation into certain areas of sex. I think we spoke with like 5 to 10 people to get a really nuanced idea of the topic that we were looking at. It was so much work. It took months and months. Also, I played a role in that too, which is the thing that I need to work on. I became a bit of a perfectionist, always kind of wanting to make it better and wanting to get more people or redo something. Or because we spoke to so many people, we actually had to cut out a lot of really, really good stuff. And, you know, a conversation that I would have with an expert was reduced to a few minutes of grabs rather than being able to use all of it. So then with Glad You Came, I was like, well, how can I have these deeper conversations and all of this gold that was coming out with the people that I was talking to? So yeah, there was quite an intentional decision around it.
What should a listener expect from Glad You Came?
Expect conversations about sex. And if you don't want to listen to that, don't listen to it because we're talking about sex a lot. Yeah, we've warned you. The conversations are sex positive, they're inclusive. One of them was how to go down on someone. What are some things that you should do? It gives the information that a lot of people, you know, furiously go to Google for to be like, how do I even have sex? One episode with Chris Cheers was about trauma and how to approach that with sex. But then there's episodes about pegging with Rosie Rivette. We cover a lot of ground.
I was listening to one recently you did with Milo around the fatigue of finding the one, and the conversation reframe around platonic love and finding romantic relationships within your friendships. And I just thought it was such a fantastic episode.
You interview a lot of people on your pod. You've been a guest on a lot of pods. I'm wondering, is there a specific conversation with someone or a topic that you continue to come back to? Like, what was one that really resonated with you? And then a follow-up to that would be, is there a dream guest to have on your pod?
Oh my goodness.
Great cue, so.
Thrown you already.
Wow, that is such a big question. The episode I recorded with Dr. Chris Cheers, speaking with him was amazing because he comes at it from like a psych lens and I come at it from like a somatic sexology lens, and we could really geek out about it. It also, I think, was a really important episode because we had a lot of people share how we finally had access to information that they hadn't had before, understanding some of the challenges or understanding the things that get in the way of people having great sex. And a lot of that can be, you know, sexual trauma. Who would I want? There is an incredible pleasure activist, writer, poet. Did I say artist yet? No, maybe they would call themselves that. Adrienne Marie Brown, they wrote Pleasure Activism, and that book has had such a profound impact on my life and how I understand pleasure, and it's really beautiful. And I think that it would be, I'd feel so out of my depth, but it would be such an honor to geek out and to understand the makings of their brain and how they speak about sex, and, you know, pleasure being a form of resistance and pleasure being, you know, really radical and really important. So
I can't imagine you being out of your depth. Like, what would that look like? I feel like you'd be pretty controlled at all times.
Yeah, no, definitely not. My partner would say no.
We have said, you know, multiple times throughout this whole app that you are so brilliant at facilitating these great conversations, creating that very comfortable space. And I think a lot of that comes down to the community that you've attracted and garnered. We have a lot of people that are very interested in community building, and that's something that we're so interested in with Dome. We have a little, how many times can you say community in one episode situation? I think we're in double digits now, which is good.
Definitely.
What tips would you give to people that are trying to start their own community or really pull people around a shared cause?
A community isn't a friendship group. And in your community, there are going to be people who you don't like. There are going to be people who you don't think the same. There are going to be people you don't want to like spend all your time with. And actually that's really important, because a community is a place where people come together. Maybe friendship emerges. It is a place where people can gather and be different. And that's why communities are so important, because we have our individuality and we have our differences, but that doesn't mean that we can't all exist there. If you are intending to build a community, can you remove yourself from this idea that I think a lot of people have, which is, you're my friends, you're my family. It's such a Taylor Swift thing. Like, you know, you're my
Major Swiftie right here. Major.
The ways that she speaks to people, it's such a one-way interaction for people who are engaging with someone like Taylor Swift. When you can get on board with the idea that we're not all going to agree, we're not all going to be friends, we're not all going to love each other, I think then you will start to feel less overwhelmed or distressed when someone does disagree with you or someone presents a different perspective, and that's an important part of community.
I love that.
That's going to be a great soundbite.
Oh, good.
But it's so true, because then it's not performative. When you know that there is nuance and there is difference, then you can get into the real talk and you can have those conversations, because that space is there to support it. So I think that's a really, beautiful take on community.
If we can flip it a bit, are there any communities that you're a part of, or creators or podcasters even, that you think do that really well and you feel very comfortable in that space?
There is a community I'm a part of that's not online. My girlfriend runs a queer swimming group, and that is like...
love it. Where is it? When and where? Tell the people.
Yeah, you should definitely come if you want to.
Take us offline.
Okay. That's a beautiful group that I felt so lucky to be a part of. I have another, community group that I'm a part of that is a bunch of sexologists, psychologists, like our sort of supervision group. They're the ones that come to mind. I don't necessarily feeling like I'm getting a sense of community by being online. I'm actually engaging and learning and being stimulated. It doesn't feel like community for me right now, and that might change.
Absolutely. And I think it's something that we're really conscious of here as well. The power of in-person, communities, events, bringing people together beyond the screen is so, and increasingly so, important. We have, for our final couple of questions, one from a listener who is a massive fan of yours and of your work and a big admirer. And she would like to know, can you please give us some quick tips or tricks that you can do in an everyday life that maybe you can create habits out of that help you feel more confident and comfortable engaging in otherwise taboo conversations?
I'm thinking of my sort of somatic brain now. For anyone who hasn't heard the word somatic, basically it's an approach to therapy that also values what we're experiencing in our bodies. So the top-down approaches are often like the classic psychology, counseling, talk-based therapies, and somatic approaches are what we would call bottom-up. So it's also like bringing the body into it. For someone who's wanting to build confidence, we need to get a sense of how we're feeling in our body. And when we're not feeling confident, asking yourself, like, what am I noticing? What does this feel like for me? Like, what emotions are present for me? What sort of language am I using around this? Confidence is built when we do something over and over and over and over and over again. When we're at the start of something, we can look at where we want to be, and that can sort of paralyze some of us in just staying where we are. But if you can be a bit clunky and be a bit awkward and not try to be an expert straight away, but just be in the process of learning, that's where your confidence will be built. You have to get on board with the idea that you're learning. You're not going to be an expert at kissing if you've never kissed before. So you need to practice. And I think it's the same thing with communicating ideas. I don't know if I answered that question, but
you did. Okay. And Maddie will absolutely love it. And she'll be very excited that, you did. So thank you very much for that.
When you put yourself in that learner's mindset, it relieves that pressure, right? And the expectations. So you're just able to kind of lean into it a little bit more. So Love that reframe. Final question. We always ask our guests, if you were to host a meetup for your community, what are we doing? What are we talking about? What are we listening? Where are we meeting up?
What would I do? I'd get a really nice big space
Love.
with lamps and dim lighting. No fluorescent.
Thank you.
Like this.
Thank you.
Yes. No
perfect.
fluorescent, nothing intense. Make sure there's like heaps of yummy food, even like different things that people can engage with, especially if you're coming and you have no idea about anyone else. Having different spaces or things that you can engage with to connect with people, I find is really important. I would also do a process of bringing everyone together. That can feel like really awkward, but I think it's actually really important when we are bringing a group of people together that we connect in and we clock each other's faces and we, see each other as human beings, and we can put aside like the judgment of what that person is based on what they look like or how they're holding their body, and create safety there. I would try my best to make it like a really collaborative evening where we're all learning from each other. That's what I'm thinking right now.
Okay, so what are we doing?
Yeah, I think particularly at the moment there needs to be more
Absolutely.
community experiences.
And then we'll all go to the swim club after.
Yeah, and then we'll go for a
Beautiful.
swim.
Then we'll run it back.
Yes.
Oh, gee, we cannot thank you enough for coming on and speaking to us. It's such a privilege to be able to ask you these questions, have you in the Dome. And I think the Dome is will be very, very excited about this. For those who are just following on now, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at gspot_, or you can listen to the podcast, Glad You Came, and In Bed, or you could read my book that came out last year that's called The Modern Guide to Sex. Or if you're, wanting to go on a website, go to www.georgiagrace.co,
Absolutely.
read a blog.
Remember that?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much again. We really appreciate it. And on our end, people should like, comment, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Leave a review. We want to hear what you think. Find us on Instagram, on TikTok at Home of Dome. And of course, jump on our website, homeofdome.com, and join our waitlist. Lots of exciting stuff coming up, and you want to be the first to know.
We're Soph and Belle, and we'll see you next time in the Dome.
This podcast was recorded on Gadigal land. We would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of this land and the oldest storytellers in the world. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.